When you think of Olympus, you think of unusual designs or cameras that don't always fit the cameras that didn't always fit the expectations of the marketplace. Let's put it that way. And so here are two cameras that are very different, however, extremely related. Aside from the placement of the selenium cell magnifiers around the lens, mechanically they're very, very similar. I wouldn't say identical, but actually pretty close to being identical. There's a lot to like about each camera. First of all, they're purely mechanical. They offer auto exposure and limited manual exposure. This is a half-frame camera. This is the Olympus Pen. The Pen being the brand name or the model name for a series of cameras in which that Olympus produced that used only half the width of a 35 millimeter frame. So, for example, instead of on a roll of 36, you would then now get 72 photos. Whereas this used a standard 35, well, they both use standard 35 millimeter frame, but this produced a standard size 35 millimeter print. Sorry about the black tape. I had a little knife accident. As I mentioned, mechanically, they're very similar, possibly even identical, aside from the different lenses. So this camera uses a 2.8 30 millimeter lens, and this camera uses a 2.8 40 millimeter lens. Is it possible that they're the same lens? Well, no, I don't think so. It wouldn't make sense anyway because they use different lens barrels. But you can see a lot of the similarities aside from this and this. You can see the viewfinder. This viewfinder is actually, if it was turned horizontally and enlarged a little bit, it would pretty much be the same. Placement of the flash synchronization port is the same on each. And also, what is interesting, to disassemble these, you remove the screw on either end, or to remove the top deck anyway. And there are two screws. One here, rotate this 180 degrees, there's a second screw here. And the same is true of this camera. So at the 12 o'clock position, and then again at the 6 o'clock position, remove each of those screws, the top deck lifts off. However, because these are standard hot shoes, there is a synchronization wire that is soldered onto the underside of this contact point. Both are dial wind cameras. So you wind this until it stops, and then you can take your photo. Like so. This has a black covering, although this also was made in chrome. Chrome with a black covering. I don't remember where I found this camera, but I happened to come across this, so I bought it. This camera I bought as part of a set. I bought two Olympus pens for $50. $50? Or was it $25? I don't recall. At a flea market in Pittsburgh, so that's where I happened to get this one. The other one is an earlier model because it has a key to unlock the back, a fold-down key. As I mentioned earlier, they both have selenium meters to power the exposure. They're auto exposure with limited manual exposure, and you can see each one has auto exposure listed right on this dial. This dial is very close to the front of the camera, so when you want to make changes, you just have to make sure you're turning the right dial. There's a distance meter that just uses what we call pictograms: mountain, group photo, two people portrait, and finally a portrait view close-up. Underneath the lens, well, not underneath this lens. This uses the same pictograms. However, you'll notice that the distance marker, as well as the notation for setting up your exposure, those are here on the side. And there's a reason for that, which I'll explain. You can see the little red hash mark that indicates where each of these is located. So once again, landscape, which is a mountain, group portrait, two people portrait, and then single person portrait. And on the bottom are the actual distances. Let's see, oh, here's another little red hash mark right there. And you can see the distances. These have small little detentes or click stops for each of those marked, for each of those indicated distances. So it's really 3 feet. I'm sorry, it's infinity, then probably 9 feet, maybe 5 feet, and then a close-up at just under 3 feet. As I mentioned, there's no distance markers here, but it does have the same click stop. Top decks aren't really that similar, although this one has a, for this camera, the frame counter dial is right here and it's transparent, so you can see at a glance pretty much where things stand, you know, as far as how many photos you've taken and how many you have left. Here, it's just, you can see just a couple numbers, and then of course you do the mental math. The shutter release with both is right here on the top deck. This also, wind by dial, press the shutter release. The backs are open in a similar manner. There's a small little lever right here that you pull down, back pops open. So looking at the two cameras, there's a lot that's identical. There's some, except for the pressure plate. Pressure plate here, of course, is only half the width of this pressure plate. And of course, the role of the pressure plate is to keep the film flat against the film rails to ensure that you get as sharp as photo as possible, dependent, of course, on the lens being of sufficient quality that it will record a sharp photo. Film runs from left to right, and here's your sprocket, and then here's your take-up spool. Sometimes some cameras offer a little serrated wheel. In this case, because it's you're using just a dial to advance the film, you can use this to help get your film started. Same with this camera. Now with this camera, this is slightly unusual, not unheard of, but it is slightly unusual. There are two little slots here, and there you go over the film sprockets. In this case, the pressure plate isn't wide enough to require that. Both of them have little springs, presumably to keep your film spool, your roll film, the cartridge itself, flat or pushed down into the film chamber so it doesn't rattle around. Just push these to close. I couldn't find any evidence that this used foam seals, so that's a bit different. This camera did use foam seals because I had to dig them out, and I'm going to replace them in a bit. The backs are very similar, although I will say that the channels here, or the sides of the channel on this camera, are much deeper, so perhaps it didn't really use foam seals. There was a piece of foam in here that had degraded, and I've already replaced it. With this one, you can see the remnants of the foam, and I'll clean that up and replace the foam later. On the bottom, fairly simple, not much here. About the only thing really here is a tripod socket on each, centered over the lens, and the film rewind button. And that's a press and release film rewind button. You just have to press it once, and then you can start rewinding the film using the crank that's on the top deck. Very simple. This is a fold-away crank, so when you're not using it, you just stow it that way. Of course, it will rotate, but that's normally what cameras did in that era. The Trip 35 was produced from 1967 to 1984. That's a 17-year production run, which is extremely long. And the only reason you produce any item for that length of time is if it's selling well. The Olympus Pen, on the other hand, this particular model, the EES.2, was produced for just 3 years, from 1968 to 1971. And if you think about it, around 1971, that really was pretty much the end of the half-frame craze. Both viewfinders are very similar. They have, well, actually, they're not similar. This viewfinder, both viewfinders have parallax marks because that's because, of course, the viewfinder is offset. It does not centered over the lens. This viewfinder has an additional little spot in here. It's a small window to the lower right of the viewfinder, and what it does is it projects the information that are on both of these dials. One will show you that with the pictogram, doesn't show you the distance, of course, and the other one shows you whether you're set on A for automatic or your aperture. I don't know if you could reverse this lens so it would show the distance. I'm going to guess that you probably could, but you would have to disassemble this part of the camera and then figure that out. To set your film speed for this camera is ASA only, which meant it was for the North American market. I sometimes say American market, but we can say North American market. And so available film speeds for the meter run from 400 down to 25. At that time, there were actually quite a few 25 film speeds, including Kodachrome. Kodachrome was Kodak's slide film, very highly regarded even to this day, even though no longer available and there's no place to process it. Agfa also made a 25-speed black and white film. And so you set the film speed in a similar manner right here. And available film speeds also ran from 25 to 400. This also was ASA only. ASA later became ISO, and it's the same ISO that digital cameras use. So they're really directly comparable. As you can see, the body covering is very similar with this diamond. Even though it's not on a, it's not on a diamond shape. It's sort of like what you would think of as a diamond grip pattern. It's fairly comfortable hold, and it's a synthetic material, but it does its job. Now, as I mentioned, these offer automatic exposure. This uses a trap jaw system, and how the trap jaw system works is this selenium meter. There's an internal meter needle that you don't see. And so as you press down the shutter release, it actually captures the meter needle between two sets of jaws, and that determines your exposure. And I believe there's another piece that comes down, and that's what determines your exposure. It was really an early form of pre-programmed exposure in which shutter speeds were matched with certain apertures. It's a pretty cool system. Now, if it fell beyond that range, obviously you would overexpose, and if it fell, however, both of these lenses do stop down to f/22. So unless you're using 400 speed film in extremely bright daylight, you probably didn't have a problem. I'm going to guess that the exposures probably ran from about 1/30th of a second, because I don't think there's any slow speeds. 1/30th of a second, probably to right around that 250th of a second neighborhood. That's what it seemed to be for most simpler leaf shutters. These have square apertures, and that's a bit different. It's a bit more difficult to see with this camera. Let me turn off the... It's a bit more difficult to see with this camera, but you can see it right there, square aperture. Let's open this up a little bit. Same thing here. Well, this one's more snappy, and you can see it open and close. See, and it's not even square. It's more of a diamond-shaped aperture. I guess you could call that square. It's somewhere between slightly diamond-shaped and square. I think it depends on what you happen to want to call it that day. And if you notice, it says 4 flash. Now, I've tested the shutters in this camera. The shutter runs at about 1/37th of a second for the flash setting. So here we have the Olympus Trip 35 and the Olympus Pen EES.2. That certainly is a forgettable name, and you always sort of wonder, where exactly do they come up with these names? In a future episode, we're going to take a look at the Pen F, or the model that I have, which is the Pen FT. and talk about it as really the ultimate expression of the half-frame camera. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And if you'd like to see me cover a particular camera, please let me know in the comments below, or drop me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. Until next time, keep on taking photographs.